How has China transformed itself from a largely poor agrarian society into the world's second largest economy? How has China evolved from a closed, insular society into a champion of globalization, engaging actively with almost every country on earth? How has China alone contributed a full 30% of annual world economic growth over the past few years? How has China alone accounted for 70% of the world's total poverty reduction? How has China made this miracle happen? What is China's path? This week we explore China's path in China's new era to be closer to China. Prior to the beginning of China's reform and opening up in the late 1970s, the country was beset with mass political movements and the people were mired in poverty. China had among the lowest GDPs per capita in the world. Since then, under the leadership of the Communist Party of China and with the dedication of the Chinese people, China has become the world's second largest economy, a middle-income country, and is on the threshold of eliminating all absolute poverty, an astonishing accomplishment. How did this developmental miracle come about? China says that the country's success relates directly to the country's chosen path, which it defines as socialism with Chinese characteristics. What do these terms actually mean? China's path, socialism, Chinese characteristics. How does China's path relate to Chinese civilization? I'm here at a special forum on Chinese civilization and China's path, which I'm privileged to co-organize and co-host with the Academy of Chinese Culture, China's highest level institute of Chinese culture. To understand China, one must understand Chinese civilization and China's path. This forum is a special way to be closer to China.
从这边这个云图看，实际上就是一定在这个地方，就是河南这个地方。是从现在来看，一定到了我们头顶了，就是我们现在的云层面已经比较高了。
按照之前咱制定的计划，4个组分2班，5个组长带队，烟、火一定不能带，相同咱头一调备。
On this farm in central China, the wheat harvest is about to begin. Before the heavy rain hits, Du Tong and his team must harvest around 860 hectares of wheat.
咱这个4号到5号预报的中到大暴雨，俺这是粘土地，下了雨后车进不了地，咱这个种子收不到厂里面，会导致这个小麦烂到地里面。
The farm deploys 37 large harvesters. Each one can carry 3,300 pounds of grain. From their experience, the farmers know that 2 machines working the same field can achieve maximum efficiency. The farm was established in 1950 as part of major land reforms soon after the People's Republic of China was founded. But this land wasn't always bountiful and often stricken by floods. Based on the long-term experience of the Communist Party of China, the CPC, and with the support of both the central and provincial governments, the land was eventually transformed from barren to fertile. In the late 1970s, the advent of China's historic reform and opening up process mobilized legions of hardworking Chinese farmers. Funds were allocated from the state budget, advanced technologies were introduced, and the structure of agricultural production was optimized. In the late 1970s, the advent of China's historic reform and opening up process mobilized legions of hard-working Chinese farmers. Funds were allocated from the state budget, advanced technologies were introduced, and the structure of agricultural production was optimized. Today, this area provides China's entire Central Plains region with high-quality wheat seeds. It's already raining 90 kilometers away. The weather forecast predicts that rain will reach the farm in about 20 hours. Du and his team must work through the night.
现在仅剩就这小地块、大地块，剩一点活头，基本上是完了，算是圆满完成任务了都。
Du's team finally completes the harvest just before the rain arrives as predicted. In addition to the hard work of local residents, China's agricultural sector has provided a series of supportive policies and measures to maximize food security and especially to safeguard the farmer's basic livelihood. From sowing to reaping over the 4 seasons, the crops grow and mature. China's massive food supply system continues to cater to the daily needs of nearly 1.4 billion Chinese in the world's most populous nation. Using 7% of the world's arable land to feed 22% of the world's population, the Chinese people have accomplished this seemingly impossible mission with diligence and solidarity, all of it achieved under the unified, centralized leadership of the CPC Central Committee. Behind this miracle, say Chinese officials, is what's known as China's path. I'm joined by Carrie Brown, director of the Lao China Institute, King's College London, Fang Ning, secretary of the Party Committee and research fellow, Institute of Political Science, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Zhang Yunling, Academy member and research fellow, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Daniel Bell, Dean, School of Political Science and Public Administration, Shandong University. Gentlemen, welcome. China's path is socialism with Chinese characteristics. Let's unpack each word. We normally hear that phrase and it becomes like a single idea, but in fact there are 3 ideas, well 4 if you include China: path, socialism, and Chinese characteristics. So I'd like to just begin with a simple definition of each of those, then we'll see how they fit together. Professor Fang, would you like to begin?
The path generally refers to our current social system, which is also referred to by some people as a political model or the China model. Generally speaking, it refers to the set of practices adopted and implemented across China today. First of all, socialism entails some basic connotations. The concept of socialism was drawn from the West and is historically meant a system of social equality, justice, and harmony. Yet today in China, it serves as an element. That is to say, it's an evolving concept that is part of the solution to our current social problems with Chinese characteristics. This concept highlights our actual national and international conditions. During this process, we'll think about how to realize industrialization, urbanization, and modernization in a way that also delivers social fairness and justice.
Professor Zhang, the concept of Chinese characteristics, we see that now being applied to many different kinds of terms. And sometimes when you hear something repeated over and over again, it loses its power. So how important in Chinese ideology is the concept of Chinese characteristics?
Characteristics actually covers a wide range of spheres. For example, in terms of politics, its characteristic is mainly manifested by decades of the CPC strivings. Nowadays, there are only a few countries left in the world that were established by and continue to be led by communist parties. The second characteristic relates to our economic model, as we learned and adopted certain features of the market economy. Indeed, a pure market economy cannot address China's problems. It must be integrated with China's particular characteristics. That's why we've called ours a socialist market economy. Third, the characteristics of our society is crucial. Over the course of human history, we've never seen a nation with such a huge population attempt this mass modernization in order to achieve common prosperity. To this end, we must find a way. Take urbanization, for example. It's hard to imagine that in the UK, fewer than 1% of the population lives in rural areas. It's distressing to even imagine China becoming like that. So China must find its own way in building a modern society. We also shouldn't neglect our historical foundations. The Chinese people have suffered from poverty for hundreds of years. The market economy itself is notorious for widening the gaps between the rich and the poor. Can we endure it? It's a process that we must go through. China may be home to the highest proportion of the world's wealthy and on track for the fastest growth of its affluent classes, yet we must find a way to benefit all Chinese.
Daniel, how do you see the relationship between China's path of socialism with Chinese characteristics and Chinese civilization, Chinese ancient cultures?
More and more, this idea of Chinese characteristics is taking on also a kind of cultural component and strong valuation of the best parts of Chinese culture. And, for example, some of the values that have been mentioned, like hexie or harmony, it's actually not a strong part of the socialist tradition, but it is obviously central to the Confucian tradition. And that's being valued. For example, the opening ceremony of the Olympics in Beijing, that they chose to highlight the character he, for harmony, as a central representation of Chinese culture. I mean, that's clearly a Chinese characteristic. Also, the idea that there's always going to be a need for a meritocratically selected leaders and a relatively strong state to bring about social change.
You stress the idea that a political meritocracy is a critical part of Chinese characteristics. Why so?
Well, it goes back over 2,000 years. There's always been an argument in Chinese political culture about how to select and promote leaders with above average ability and virtue. And there's been arguments about which abilities matter, which virtues matter, what are the best ways of assessing ability and virtue. But there's a recognition that it requires some sort of complex bureaucratic mechanism that needs to be adapted differently in different times. And I think after the Cultural Revolution, the most kind of striking change in the Chinese political system is this reestablishment of a complex bureaucratic system, which in principle is meant to select and promote capable officials who serve the community.
And this is clearly a Chinese characteristic as opposed to a socialist characteristic.
Right, exactly. I mean, some people compare it a bit to Lenin's idea of the avant-garde, but it's still different.
When I hear the term China model, it seems to be connoting that that model is broadly applicable to others as opposed to a way or a path or something you choose yourself.
Yeah, there was a lot of resistance to talking about a model in the past. I think in the 90s, Chinese officials didn't really like it. But now, I guess in recent years, there's some parts of it that are applicable to what the outside world can learn. So I think it was referred to at the 19th Congress, the idea of a China model.
This fourth plenary session tried to figure out what our Chinese path is all about while highlighting the benefits of exploration. Indeed, our politics emphasizes the need for exploration. That's why I prefer we use the word path rather than model. With the advance in new technologies, it's hard to tell what China will look like in the next 5 years. No one foresaw a world in which a cell phone could address all your needs in China today. Compared with Western powers, China has more readily embraced the new technologies that apply to daily life transactions, transportation, and other areas. In this aspect, I think China takes the lead, leaving Western countries behind. But there are problems yet to be addressed, given China's stage of development. Though the Chinese are faring better and better, there still exists a substantial wealth gap between, say, China and Japan, or between China and the U.S. Thus, model seems to infer a fixation under the CPC's leadership, which I believe may trigger misunderstanding. The best way is to stress the process, how far China has come until now, and where it will head moving forward down the road. The greatest features of China's path can be summarized in 2 words: exploration and reform.
We'll be right back.
Coming up next, China's path is a developmental journey of step-by-step exploration and adaptation. What trade-offs has China's path made? What challenges may China's path face? Why is 2020 such a crucial year? These questions and more on Closer to China. In the early days following the founding of the People's Republic of China, by virtue of the CPC's leadership and the socialist system, China concentrated its limited human, material, and financial resources on major sectors to industrialize and modernize its industry, agriculture, national defense, and science and technology. In 1964, though it was a difficult time, 2 bombs and 1 satellite were launched successfully. Since 1978, when the reform and opening up process was initiated, China has built many major projects. For example, the Three Gorges Dam, the China-Russia natural gas pipeline, the South-North water diversion, the Qinghai-Tibet Railway, the Expressway Network, the high-speed railway network, the ultra-high voltage power grid, and manned spaceflight. Indeed, China has completed scores of massive national projects. Since late 2012, when the CPC held its 18th National Congress, the nation has made breakthroughs on a wide variety of innovative projects, such as the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, the Blue Whale 1 drilling platform, the first domestically built aircraft carrier, the Beidou navigation satellite system, and the 500-meter aperture spherical telescope Tianyuan. More broadly, China has made remarkable progress in poverty alleviation, disaster prevention and relief, and ecological protection. All these are products of China's path, the CPC leadership, and a strong system of governance, setting actionable policies and concentrating national resources. Nevertheless, despite all these accomplishments, in a new era of complex situations, both domestically and on the international stage, China's path faces new problems and challenges.
All political systems have trade-offs. We know the benefits of China's system in terms of economic development, in terms of building infrastructure. But what are some of the liabilities? What are some of the problems with this system? And how is China addressing those problems? Professor Brown?
I guess the consultative system that's in place at the moment, it's good at prioritizing. So that's what it's proved in the last sort of 40 years. And the sort of effort that goes, for instance, into something like building a high-speed train network, I mean, this is unprecedented. But I guess now China's entering to a period where the prioritization is not so easy. There's other things that need to be looked at, from whether you have a kind of health system that's comprehensive for an aging population to how do you deal with environmental issues. So I suspect that the big test for prioritization is coming. I mean, in a sense, you've got a transition from a society which is been really kind of developing itself, so now it's a sort of middle income level, and then more difficult things happen.
In telling China's story, we usually stress our superiority or strengths. But in fact, we do have our share of problems. First, the superiority of China's system is, as Deng Xiaoping said, our ability to pool national strength to carry out major undertakings. With strong CPC leadership, we can design and implement unified development plans. Yet the great responsibility assumed by one party or one political center entails sole accountability to address various contradictions. That's why, as you said, China sees an upsurge of various competing interests, concerns, and contradictions in the process of diversifying our development. The CPC is bound to be held accountable for these contradictions and problems. That's also the contradiction between officials and the general public. That is, the contradiction between people of different classes and the administration is easily concentrated. The Western mechanism is relatively less concentrated. People may disapprove of Trump, but if Trump is succeeded by a new president, people would once again have high hopes. This is another difference between the systems. Second, you may have noticed that China sticks strongly to our goals. We've pledged to remain true to our original aspiration and keep our mission firmly in mind. What is our mission? To realize industrialization and modernization as soon as possible. Development represents our overriding goal. That's why the CPC has a strong sense of mission and goals, which could lead to neglect of other problems. That's bearable to some extent. But from a long-term perspective, when compared with the West, our system's response to various concerns or existing mechanisms in order to rectify errors are relatively weak. For U.S. President Trump, a lot of people criticize and even try to impeach him. So he's very cautious and communicates with people on many policies. For us, it's easy to strive for one singular goal and override all objections. This may provoke backlash, particularly for local governments. For example, if a local government tries to build a road aiming to serve and benefit all people, but are confronted with the objections of some, a conflict is born. In addition, while our system now enjoys a relatively good environment of rapid growth, there may be costs. More problems will emerge if the growth rate dips and financial conditions worsen.
When we talk about China's path of socialism with Chinese characteristics, we are generally looking at China's achievements, which have been remarkable in economic development. But let's look forward. What are the challenges ahead for the Chinese system? What are the potential obstacles? What are the risks that China needs to recognize now to prepare for what may happen in the future? Professor Zhang?
The first challenge is within our most prominent political feature of consultative politics. Its weakness is being relatively soft, time-consuming, and with too much room for maneuver. Sometimes the challenge lies in how to better integrate it with the laws. In China, absolute rule of law doesn't work, as it requires a process of consultation. That's why a long process of deliberation lies ahead before the promulgation of any new law or regulation. In the end, the softness of law is more often demonstrated, which is unacceptable. The second challenge is that in a diversified, globalized world, people's interests do not rely entirely on domestic affairs within China, but are also related to the outside world. The question is how to balance domestic and international growth. If we don't perform well, people may leave the country, especially the richer segments of society. That would be troublesome for any country, to be left only with its poor population. If some of the poor also are forced to leave, that could bring chaos to China. Simply put, I think the second challenge is about how to ensure stability through innovation and simultaneously achieve multiple goals. That's why China's politics emphasizes the need for stability as a precondition. The third challenge is how to support our elderly. China has grown old before it grows rich. Old age care could be a major social crisis down the road. We must find a way out, otherwise it may devastate our society.
I'd like to present the question of the sharpest difference between China's path and the Western system, and I'm going to ask one from each side. So let's start with Professor Fang. Very simply, what is the sharpest difference between China's path and the Western system?
When it comes to difference in nature, we've talked a lot about it. For example, China is an ancient civilization with its own traditions and culture, which continue to exert their influence today. Moreover, socialism, Marxism, and the CPC's leadership all demand social equality and harmony. Surely Western societies also proclaim such goals. We believe, however, there are still sizable differences. Socialism is certainly different from capitalism, which I now see more clearly as we're at different stages of development. China is well on its way to realizing full industrialization, urbanization, and modernization. Some European countries and the U.S. went through this stage decades ago, if not earlier. That's why we differ in so many aspects, such as with environmental issues, social equity, and the level of public services.
Professor Brown, what do you think of the differences? What is the sharpest difference from your perspective?
Well, I guess capitalism as it's practiced in Europe and America is still something that emphasizes practice and pragmatism, okay? And here, once upon a time, I suppose you'd say ideology was in sort of the principal area, and it's now meant to be more pragmatic. But I still think the sort of need for ideological justification for measures here is still important. This is not an ideology-free environment. So I think, in a sense, we kind of like to pretend in Europe and America that we don't really have an ideology, although it's more, you know, kind of probably more embedded. And here I think it's a similar sort of pretense, but I think ideology is still important.
Wouldn't we say that the primary differentiation between the systems is that in China there is a single leading party that is perennial and in perpetual in its leadership system? Isn't that a critical distinction? Daniel?
Sure. I think at the end of the day there's two main differences. One is the scale. I mean, I'm from Canada, and the idea that the government here has an obligation for future generations and for the whole world. I mean, it's just not true in Canada, and you don't have this sense that you're a huge player on the global stage. Of course, if you compare China to the U.S., then you lose that difference. But the clear difference between China and the U.S. obviously is that there's one organization that is meant to select leaders with above average ability and plan for the long term. Whereas in the U.S., there's not that system.
At the core of China's path is consultative politics, while the West basically adopts combative politics. These two models are quite different. Under these two, different governance methods, political structures, and mechanisms are formed. From this perspective, China's path is not cast in stone, but has continually evolved over the past 70 years, since the People's Republic of China was founded. This ongoing evolution is also the source of the CPC's vitality. For the West, however, the system is stagnant. The U.S. Constitution, for example, has stayed the same for more than 200 years, yet China's Constitution has seen occasional revisions whenever needed. In our politics, we seek the greatest common denominator, to unite various interest groups to ensure that we're all headed in the same direction. China keeps a close eye on stability, then, amid this stable environment, encourages creative innovation and development.
In this time of global shifts, the global community must understand one another, especially with respect to China, which is moving to center stage of the world. Simply put, China's path is socialism with Chinese characteristics, which stresses the leadership of the Communist Party of China, the CPC, and the CPC's commitment to the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and the broad-based fulfillment of the Chinese people. China's path maintains a strong government in all sectors, promotes economic development with the market playing a decisive role, enforces social stability and regulates social discourse, and prioritizes the welfare of all citizens, including the poorest. The unique feature distinguishing the China model from Western models, of course, is that the CPC, the party, maintains perpetual leadership and utilizes a meritocratic system rooted in Chinese civilization. Developmental policies that must have long-term commitments, such as building infrastructure, science and technology, and poverty alleviation, can have long-term commitment. There are trade-offs, of course, as with all political systems. The sustained anti-corruption campaign addresses one such trade-off. Comprehensively improving rule of law addresses another. Continuing challenges include how to provide sufficient checks and balances and how to provide diverse opinions in policymaking. This forum, China's Civilization and China's Path, featuring Chinese and foreign thought leaders, is a milestone in exploring how Chinese thought undergirds Chinese politics. It's a lot to cover, but it's a good step to be closer to China.